seeing that we have a bunch of guys in here. We've been going over people who've encountered Jesus in different scenarios, different situations when it comes to the Gospel of John. Since we have a lot of guys in this class over the next few weeks, we're going to be studying about and focusing about the men that encountered Jesus and what changed about them or what did not change about them, and what happened to them when it comes to their story of meeting Jesus. So it's the same thing, it's just we're going to have a particular male spin on this. If I were to go around the room, which I'm not going to, but there would be story after story of a beginning point. A point where we can mark our lives almost as a before and after. I'm not talking about salvation. I'm not talking about baptism. I'm not talking about when you became a Christian. I'm just talking about there's certain times in your life where things happened, where some switch was flipped, and it's a before and after. Every Christian man in here has had that happen. That there was a shift when it comes to your focus, a shift when it comes to your heart. When it came to a decision that was made, maybe that you haven't made before. We all remember the decision when it comes to being a Christian, confessing Christ, being baptized, and I hope you made that decision, and if not, I hope you'll study about that. But I'm asking you to think about a point where I stopped attracting life to me, where everything in life was no longer about me and what I wanted to do and what I wanted to accomplish or the plans that I had. And the shift started to attract life in people and point them to Jesus, okay? That's where I want you to be. I hope that you will get to be, if you're not there yet, to the point where your life is not attracting things to yourself. Your life is attracting things to Jesus, okay? Some of us have gotten to that point. Like I said, I'm not going to ask you, but some of us struggle to get centered on that. And some of us struggle to get anchored when it comes to that, and point other people to the light when it comes to our lives, and that be the main focus. Some of us have way too much invested in this life, and I'm sure you've had the roller coaster ride just like I have when it comes to getting to a point where you see Christ as the most important thing above everything else. And I don't know where you are on that roller coaster, because it is a roller coaster where your focus gets on Jesus and on the things that you need to be doing, but then something happens and you go down in one of those valleys, right? And you have to come back up, and you have to see your sin, you see your mistakes, see your loss of focus, and you come back up. And the Lord helps you with that. Because like the song says, He's God on the mountain, but He's what? He's God in the valley too. So there are things that distract us from the race that we're supposed to be running. When we should be thinking more about Christ in this church, we're thinking about everything else. So you can fill in the blank when it comes to your life, because we all have those stories. Every single person in here has lost their focus when it comes to Jesus and focused on something else. And everybody in here is at a different point of maturity. You have different eyes, you have different ears to hear, and you have different hearts, okay? My heart is not the same as when I first started my walk with Christ, as your heart is not the same as when you first started your walk with Christ. Hopefully you have matured. Hopefully you have seen things differently. Hopefully the experiences you've been through have helped you understand that God works in very mysterious ways, but at the same time that your walk is to be with Him in the light always. So wherever you are at right now, I hope that this class and these series of classes will help you to focus on Christ more and to see where you are at, so that you can examine yourself to see where you're at. Because every race has a beginning point. It's a point at which you start you step the starting line, right? And you know that you are in that race, and everything changes focus after that. Because when you join that race, when you become a part of that Christian race, you change direction, all right? You're going a different direction than you were before, and you have a different destination in mind when you start that race than you had when you started. When you start a race, do you know the destination point at the end? If you were a runner, I'm not. If you're a runner, do you know the destination at the end? Absolutely. You know where the course leads. When you're a Christian, you know exactly where the course ends. And the best illustration that I can give you when it comes to this point, and when it comes to painting this point, is the woman at the well from John chapter 4. We went over this a few months ago. But that woman obviously was attracting things to her life, and that was her focus. She was doing what she wanted with her life. She was being who he wanted to be with. She was fulfilling whatever desires she wanted to fulfill. And that was before the woman met Jesus. And then after she met Jesus, her life and her focus looked very, very different because Jesus called out her sinfulness and Jesus called out her selfishness. And Jesus said, whenever he said, bring your husband, you remember the answer, right? That Jesus got from the woman. What was that? Now, I have no husband. Jesus said, you are right. You've had 5 husbands, and the one you're with isn't your husband right now. And by the end of that conversation in John 7 and verse 28, there's a change. There's a turning point. And the woman sits down her jar at the well, and she leaves it there. I think that's a very powerful statement. She leaves what she came with Jesus. And then she goes into the city, and she starts telling everybody, come and meet a man who told me everything I ever did. Do you see the turn? She left what she was carrying with Jesus, and she went into the city and said, come and meet a man who told me everything I ever did. So there's a point that I hope and I wish that you're at, and I hope that you get to if you're not, and that is when people see what Jesus has accomplished and what Christ has accomplished in your life, more than they see what I have accomplished, more than they see what you've accomplished. The point at which Jesus shows up in your life more than you do. Okay? And that's all the things that we're going to be talking about when it comes to these encounters. Because when you encounter Jesus and you have that, whether it be after you're a Christian and maybe you've fallen away and maybe your faith isn't as strong as it needs to be, and you have what used to be called from my parents' and grandparents' voice, those come to Jesus meetings, right? And your direction changes. Because you know that you're not doing something that you need to be doing. So with everyone in here, there's a starting point. There's a point at which your focus changes, the point at which your thoughts change, where your desires are transformed by the power of God. So the first lesson we're going to see in this text that we're going to read is that there is a point where you and I have to begin life again. And the language that Jesus is going to use with Nicodemus, you know very well. That you are, you know what John 3 says? That you are born again of water and the Spirit. Every person here has had to hit that reset button because your focus became too heavy on something that it doesn't need to be on, and it's not towards Jesus. And life became about ourselves, not about Christ and His church and His glory, and we all need that reset. So let's read the text in John chapter 3 and see what we can learn from Nicodemus. So turn to John chapter 3. And we'll read verses 1 through 21. John chapter 3, 1 through 21. Now there was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. This man came to Jesus by night and said to him, Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher come from God, for no one can do these signs that you do unless God is with him. Jesus answered him, Truly, truly, I say to you, unless one is born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. Nicodemus said to him, How can a man be born when he is old? Can he enter a second time into his mother's womb and be born? Jesus answered, Truly, truly, I say to you, unless one is born of water and the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God. That which is born of the flesh is flesh, that which is born of the Spirit is spirit. Do not marvel that I said to you, you must be born again. The wind blows where it wishes, and you hear its sound, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes. So it is with everyone who is born of the Spirit. Nicodemus said to him, How can these things be? Jesus answered him, Are you the teacher of Israel, and yet you do not understand these things? Truly I say to you, we speak of what we know, and bear witness to what we have seen, but you do not receive our testimony. If I have told you earthly things you do not believe, how can you believe if I tell you heavenly things? No one has ascended into heaven except he who descended from heaven, the Son of Man. And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him may have eternal life. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son. Whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the only Son of God. And this is the judgment. The light has come into the world. People have loved the darkness rather than the light because their works were evil. For everyone who does wicked things hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his work should be exposed. But whoever does what is true comes to the light, so that it may clearly be seen that his works have been carried out in God. So, when we look at Nicodemus, Nicodemus had everything going great in his life. You look at his resume and portfolio, everything was going great. I mean, he already went through a very successful career. He'd been through that track probably for decades of his life. He seemed to be well off financially, which we'll talk about in John chapter 19 in a minute. He held a seat on the highest council in the entirety of the Jewish religion, right? Just think about that. He held a seat on the highest council in the entirety of the Jewish religion. He was like the highest legal station, like a Supreme Court judge in our country. And he was a man amongst the Pharisees. He was a ruler of the Jews. And Jesus, as we'll talk about in a minute, used the definite article and says, "You are the teacher." I mean, he was like the teacher among the Pharisees. He had an accomplished life and had become a boss literally over hundreds of thousands of people. So in your mind, I want you to picture an older man, older than me, okay? We don't know how old Nicodemus was, but we know that he was far into his 50s, probably more than that, to accomplish all the things that he did in Jewish culture. So I want you to picture and imagine a man who has devoted his younger life to years and years of training and years of schooling and years of sitting at the feet of the greatest rabbis of his day, and he's been on this track for a very long time. Like kind of when high schoolers, they pick a track when they're sophomores, juniors, and they keep on that track to college, and they go through their master's program, and they go through a doctorate, and they go to school, or they're 28 years old. They have been on a track. Nicodemus was like that, okay? Getting degree after years and years. He's been groomed for this, and he has made it to the top. He is now a part of the Sanhedrin Council, the ruling body of the entirety of the Jews. The whole of Nicodemus' life was one ladder rung after another of success and success and success being stepped through. He's at the height of power and influence and prestige. He was probably rubbing elbows with the most powerful people at the stage of John chapter 3. He has he's not been a stranger to some of the greatest teachers of his day, the rabbis that taught everybody, and now he's a ruler amongst all of them. People come to him for advice. People come to him for counsel. His contact list would have been a who's who amongst the social scene of the Jerusalems. He was a part of the most influential group of Jews, the Pharisees. And in many ways, when you look at Nicodemus, you can't help but kind of parallel what Nicodemus and his track was to the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul was a Pharisee amongst all Pharisees. He learned at the feet of the finest teachers and rabbis, and he was put on a fast track to leadership. And he's made a name for himself. Nicodemus has. I mean, if his parents were still alive, they would have been so proud of him. If he had a wife and children, he'd been set for life when it comes to all of his circumstances. He's this picture of success amongst the culture they lived in. He was amazingly successful. And what I want you to understand is that he hasn't even started his true race yet. Did you get that? He has accomplished more than most of us can imagine when it comes to living in a culture of rising the ladder of influence and power. Not only that, but also having wealth and prestige amongst the Jews. And now Jesus is calling him the teacher of the Jews. He's successful. Very successful. Not only that, he is a very religious person. As a Pharisee, we've gone over this before, he would have been meticulous in his tithes to the point that he would have, doled out a tenth of his spices at home. He was meticulous about his religion. His offerings would have been meticulous. His worship would have been meticulous. He could probably quote more Bible than the rest of us have ever read in our entire lives. He's sitting good. He's not only sitting good where he's at, he's sitting good for retirement. For years, he's taken life by the horns. He's gained power. As far as our language, he's made his millions, as we would say. And he's sitting on the highest court in the land. He's a ruler over people, and he's a powerful member of the Pharisees on the Sanhedrin Council. If you want to put it in modern day terms, he is the guy who is like 100 million subscribers on YouTube, okay? He's the guy that goes viral for all of his videos and all of his posts, and he's the guy stepping out of the limo, and everybody wants to, get selfies with him. And he's the guy having private dinners on top of hotels, and he's the guy that's bought the stocks in billion-dollar companies, has a mansion on the wall of Jerusalem overlooking the countryside. He's probably wearing the best clothes made of the finest wool, and he's probably a guy who has a yacht down at the yacht club at the Sea of Galilee. Nicodemus has spent his entire life gathering and working for a portfolio of achievements that would be the most impressive thing to look at. But the page is not turned yet. He hasn't entered the race yet. There is a starting point that he has not crossed yet. Even with all of his success, and even in all of his religion, and even with all of his worships and rituals, he has not started yet. So I want you to realize there's a starting point. When you look at the rest of the stuff in your life and the rest of the stuff you're planning in your life, and then you look at Jesus, here's my question. When does life become more about him than it does about me? All your plans, all the things you have on paper, all the things you want to accomplish, when does life become more about him than it does about me? Because life doesn't revolve around achievements, doesn't revolve around accolades, doesn't revolve around leveling up to the next status point, reaching the next rung on the ladder. It becomes about attracting people to Jesus, not attracting people to me. Nicodemus is rich, well-respected, religious leader, and he was the teacher. But here's the thing, there was something missing. Something he was still searching for and still seeking. There was an interesting word study that was done that I was reading when it came to this topic, and when it came to John chapter 3. We've talked about definite articles before, okay? And I want to use Randy as an illustration, okay? Whether you realize or not, you've heard a lot of definite articles. Like, if you ever talk to Randy and he talks about Netflix, it's the Netflix. The Netflix. So you know what I'm talking about? The Netflix. So that's a definite article. When you put something in front of, it is the singular Netflix, the Netflix, right? I'm not using that out of context anymore. You say the Netflix. If he was talking about Facebook, it would be the Facebook. What are you laughing for? That's a definite article. When you put the in front, it's the only one, right? The Netflix, the Facebook. There's a definite article in front of what Jesus says to Nicodemus when he calls him the teacher. And what this guy does is he basically deconstructs all the grammar when it comes to the original language, and he said Nicodemus was probably the oldest of all the Sanhedrin council members, much older than all the other guys that were on that council. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, because, it was just his, I guess you'd say his dissertation on this, but I want you to think about it. If Nicodemus was older than anybody else in the Sanhedrin, he hadn't started his race yet. He'd gotten all the accolades, and he'd gotten all the awards, and he'd gotten all the power and the prestige, and he'd gotten all of that. But he hadn't started his race yet. He hadn't started that part of his life where people saw Jesus more than they saw him. If you're older in this life, and I won't point at anybody, if you're older in this life, it is not too late for you to show other people Christ. We need those examples of people who are older who can still change. Whenever I think about this, I always think about John Rudd. For those of you who've been here any amount of time, you remember John, right? He was 89 years old before he ever started his race. He approached the starting line at 89 years old. Now, the implication of that is that for 89 years, his focus was not on the Lord. His focus was on something else. But at 89, he started his race. No matter how young or old you are in this room, we all have a starting point. where you cease to focus on yourself and what this life can give me, and you start to deflect everything towards Jesus. So I ask you a question. Have you started that yet? Because everyone who's a Christian is born again when they are older. Our feet, our heart, our course, they change direction. So, this is where I open it up for y'all's discussion. We got 2 more points, by the way. But that was the first point. Have you started? And like you said, some people learn through, you said trauma, learn through experiences like that. Yeah. If you're like me, you learn things the hard way. When you've actually gone through the mess up, right? And then you're like, well, I should have done that. Or maybe I should not have, put so much focus on that. And I'm not hoping and wishing a traumatic experience on any of you, but I am hoping that you will go through the experience of knowing what it is to live for Christ versus what it is to live for you. Because those end up in 2 totally different destinations.
Just because you enter the race doesn't mean you know how to run it.
Mm.
That's what Randy's saying.
Yeah.
When I look back at myself, I wasn't that way at the beginning. Until later on, I figured out I'm not doing what I need to be doing. Putting God first, trying to represent Christ before other people. But I knew I needed to be in Christ. I needed to be baptized.
Yeah.
But just because you enter the race doesn't mean you're ready to run it. So you learn that.
There's that time of maturity, I guess you'd say.
Well, I'm kind of like that. I'm 79 years old, and I'm here most of the time, and but there's times I'm not digging deep enough, maybe not enough study, maybe this, that. I'm here just like everybody else, just about all the time, but there's more there that I need to be doing than just headed back out to work Monday morning or, this or that, or whatever else. There's more that I could be doing.
But answer me this. In your own head, you don't have to answer out loud. How many of you right now are worried about how to pay for your house, how to pay for your kids? And right now, I'm worried about how to pay for college. This stuff that's on your mind all the time, And it usually revolves around finances, right? It usually revolves around paying bills, right? So you have all of these very intense desires to fulfill. But then there's the other aspect of this. That yes, you are living in this world and you have responsibilities that we talked about on Sunday morning as a man. At the same time, you have responsibilities when it comes to God. And those are almost constantly battling each other as to who is going to get priority I'm not talking about you retire from everything that you're doing and, you know, just not have anything in this life. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying there's a battle that is constantly there. Okay? And it's always going to be that way. For those of you who are older, help me out with this. Does that ever go away? When you retire, do you still think about how you're going to pay for this? What you're going to... That's the thing that's on my brain too. Where are you going to leave your kids? For those of you who are older, do you still have those things?
Because the thing about material things are important
Yeah.
to us. I mean, there's no doubt about that. We have to have them to survive. But you do. I feel like I've reached the stage that, and I don't have any money. I'm not saying that or anything. But the fact of it is, stuff like that doesn't worry you anymore. The main thing that worries you is having your life right with God. And that becomes the most important thing, and all this other stuff, whatever happens, happens, you know. And I think that's a good thing about getting older.
All right. I think that is like the first pep talk about getting older that I like. All the rest of them are like my dad. These are the scrap iron years. It's not golden years. It's scrap iron. Falling apart, things falling off. It's terrible. I like that one. I'm going to go with yours, Steve.
Well, I got one getting ready to go to college, and I'm getting ready to retire. So how's that gonna work out? I don't know. I got faith.
You got me. That's right.
Go with your Sunday morning lesson, and just keep doing it over and over and over. There is an age where there's a ton of responsibility. I mean, it's always responsibility, but the financial, there's those years that the financial burden is pulling, and
Just go easy.
it's easy to look beyond your soul and look at, and that's a dangerous place to be in for any man. And you want the responsibility of leaving, you know, I want the kids to have this, and I want that, and then you forget about your soul, or you don't forget about it, but you don't put it, everybody's gonna go through that, it's a dangerous 7 years.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer, the Bible's the answer, but
Oh, yeah.
it's easier to say than it is to do.
But just,
I'd give it every penny I have if God just said, all your kids are gonna be okay, and you know, I come
As
to
well.
and I leave the same way, it don't matter. But,
don't want that picture.
yeah, look at that.
Thanks for that.
That's what Steve's talking about.
Yeah.
What's most important is your family around you, and you know they're okay in Christ. But there's some dangerous years for a man that he can take it seriously.
I agree. Seems like the older that I get, the more I understand the concept of faith that I have not understood before. Where you're trusting in things that are not seen more than you trust in things that are.
If all you see there is to see is what's visible, and you don't see all there is to see.
No.
There's no way.
All right. We'll go on to the second one. Nicodemus was surrounded by a lot of negativity towards Jesus because what was the council he was sitting on? Okay, did the Sanhedrin jive with Jesus too much? Absolutely not, okay? And I'll give you the context of this. The chapter before this, what did Jesus just do in the temple in John chapter 2? He cleaned out all the corruption, right? Now, where did that hit some of the most influential people who were behind the scenes pocketing stuff? And they didn't write in their pocketbook. Now, if you hit somebody in their pocketbook, what's the reaction going to be?
You're gonna get their attention.
You're going to get their attention, and it's probably not in a very good way. right? So Jesus overturns the tables in the temple. He drives out the money changers, which is like, cha-ching for, some of the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin, especially when it comes to the mafia family, right? So there was a lot of stuff that Jesus did in John chapter 2 that the Sanhedrin council wanted him gone for. And now, who is approaching Jesus? We'll get to that in a minute too. Who's approaching Jesus? Nicodemus, who is a member of the Sanhedrin. Now, this council is going to constantly be in discussion about schemes and plans to get rid of Jesus. Later on, it's going to be about murdering Jesus. So, what type of environment is Nicodemus in when it comes to discussing anything about Jesus if you're in the Sanhedrin council?
He's putting his neck on the line even by approaching Jesus.
Yes, even if it is by night, he's got some courage to even step close to Jesus. Because the Sanhedrin did not appreciate Jesus at all. And whenever you brought up Jesus, there was anger, frustration, and murderous intent. Now, we don't know for sure if this had anything to do with the fact that Nicodemus sought Jesus by night, but it's a pretty good indication that there was something going on that Nicodemus did not want everyone knowing. Because who did you not want to be a target of? The Sanhedrin council. Because as we know from John chapter 11, it wasn't just that they wanted to kill Jesus, but it was they wanted to kill anybody that would point the spotlight at Jesus, so they tried to kill who in John chapter 11? You remember? He was raised from the dead. Lazarus. They wanted to kill Lazarus. Because he was pointing people towards Jesus. So, Nicodemus is really sticking his neck out when it comes to going and meeting with Jesus. So Nicodemus is constantly surrounded by people in his job who did not have good things to say about Jesus and who were actively wanting to keep other people from following Jesus. Now, a lot of you have probably been in situations like that when it comes to your job. That you are not surrounded all the time by people who are the most faithful, people who believe in God, or people who would acknowledge there is a God in any way, shape, or form. And if you're surrounded by that all the time, you might be a very strong individual. But you know what sandpaper does to the strongest board over time? It's going to wear you thin. So Nicodemus is constantly surrounded by people who did not have good things to say about Jesus. And we will get into these kind of situations too. Whether you're at a job and coworkers insult anyone who follows Jesus, or you're made fun of because you read and follow the Bible, whether you're in an unbelieving family setting, where people can't stand the self-righteous people who go to church all the time, they're just bashing people who go to church, or just in general, you feel this pressure to keep your faith quiet. Nicodemus was a man who struggled with the exact same atmosphere. I would say in an even more intense way, because I don't think someone's going to kill you for talking about Jesus where you're at. But if the Sanhedrin found out that Nicodemus is talking about Jesus, that's a real possibility. But you know what Nicodemus did? I'm not saying that he shouldn't have come to Jesus by night. I'm just saying, you know what Nicodemus did? He went to Jesus. He was constantly surrounded by those who dismissed Jesus and insulted Jesus, even hated Jesus, and Nicodemus sought to find Jesus, even when he was surrounded by the negative of those around him. I think we sometimes underestimate just how great a burden it is to be surrounded by the negative influence of others. Because if all we hear about is how bad Christians are and how awful the church is and how awful Christ is and how false his gospel is, it becomes a burden on our ears and our hearts, and that's why the church is so important. Because even when you're in a situation like that, surrounded by a negative like that, you come to a place where you know that there are people of like precious faith, and it helps you. It's important for you to surround yourself with people who know the goodness of God. Maybe all you hear where you are at is the negative things about Christianity and being biblically moral or God-centered, and you need this time to be recharged with the good and with the positive so that you can see what that negativity really is, and you can actually use that for good. So though Nicodemus was surrounded by negativity all the time when it came to how people spoke about Jesus, Nicodemus still went and found him. Comments? We got one more. Comment?
I don't think he said really, "You're Jesus." He said, "With all the miracles that you do,
From God, yeah.
They call him God,
Mm-mm.
but he said he had the power given by God.
Yeah. We know that you are a teacher who is from God.
You always hear a saying too, with great power, there's great responsibility.
Spider-Man.
Yeah, that's where I remember. But, I mean, really, if you're a leader.
I'm just saying it was. Was it not Spider-Man?
That's what I remember.
Was it not Spider-Man? Okay.
Yeah. But I mean, when you're in a leadership role, and you get that pressure from, you know, it's kinda hard to make your own, the right decision, you know it's right, you know.
And I hope we get to the last of this because it was very interesting to read the historical accounts of Nicodemus when it came to what happened to him. This is extra biblical, but it's just very interesting to read.
So here's a question that I had. The Sanhedrin was looking for Jesus later.
Yeah.
Not right here in John 3, in this Palestine. But they're getting ready to start looking for it.
Yeah.
Because they want to find it. Nicodemus didn't seem to have a lot of trouble finding it.
That's true.
Yeah, okay, I'll go for it. So he knew, later on, Nicodemus is still part of the Sanhedrin council. He's not their council constantly, but later when the Sanhedrin council is desperately trying to find him,
Yeah.
Nicodemus has not left the Sanhedrin. He knew how to find him.
Yeah.
There
And
were-
just to add dimension to that, they wanted, just like when Judas came, they were ecstatic because Judas could get into a place where no one else was around, and he could report his position and say, he's going to be here, he's the one I'm going to kiss. There's not going to be any other people around. You can come and arrest him. No crowd's going to riot, things like that. So Nicodemus might have known where he's at, and the Sanhedrin might have known where he was at when he was surrounded by a crowd, but they didn't know where he went in that solitary place. Where he went to pray, like Judas did. So, yeah, they were, by John chapter 11, they were like, give us his coordinates, we're going to go get him. We're terrified of the people. Give us somewhere we can go arrest him where nothing's going to happen. So it might have been that they could have found Jesus anywhere. They just couldn't find the opportune moment to arrest him and to drag him off without there being, yeah. So. All right, last thing. If you read about Nicodemus in all three accounts of John, okay, in John chapter 3, John chapter 7, John chapter 19, you will find that he is a very cautious and careful person. But you cannot be too cautious and too careful. Because you can't be too cautious and too careful and not ever get into the race. In John chapter 3, we see that Nicodemus is cautious and careful when it comes to how he met Jesus, and that was at night. John chapter 7. All right, the Pharisees, if you remember this, were in that council meeting, and they basically just threw the law out and said, let's get him, let's kill him, whatever. And Nicodemus kind of raises his hand back, and he brings up a technicality of the law. He does not bring up anything about Jesus being the Messiah, the Christ, or the Son of God. He starts his discussion by saying, well, the law says there's a technicality, we can't do it that way. This has nothing to do with Jesus, we want to believe in him, but the technicality of the law says we are to hear if this man has done something wrong. He's very careful, very cautious when it comes to what he says. Now, in John chapter 19, Nicodemus was very careful and cautious when it came to the body of Jesus. There's a very interesting phrase that is attached both to Joseph of Arimathea and to Nicodemus when it comes to this text. If you read it when it comes to the connection of the grammar, it has to do with Joseph and it has to do with Nicodemus. That they were secret followers of Jesus. And then it has for fear of the Jews. In other words, nobody knew that Joseph of Arimathea took the body of Jesus. And nobody knew who paid for the spices to wrap his body. And who was that? The guy we've been talking about. Nicodemus bought the spices that wrapped Jesus, and no one knew about it. He was very cautious, and he was very careful. But you have to give Nicodemus credit, because he did more than the apostles did during this time. Because where were the apostles during this time except for John? They were all scattered, fled, and hiding. And Nicodemus, even though he was doing it very cautiously and carefully, he took the spices to the burial of Jesus. So, surrounded by the negative of the death of Jesus, Nicodemus once again seeks Jesus. Now, the last thing, the Bible never tells us what happens to Nicodemus. We are not told. Just those 3 accounts, that's all we're told. We are not told what happened to Nicodemus. Historical accounts of the Jews say that he publicly confessed that Jesus was Lord. He was stripped of his status. His position in the Sanhedrin Council was taken away, and he was banished from Jerusalem after being baptized with Peter and John. We don't know if that's what happened. Historically, that's what they say. I hope that's what happened. So, what did you learn before Jerry closes us out with a bell? Anything new? Interesting? Stick with you? Crickets. Okay. Well, I hope you learned something. So we'll just go through some of the guys that Jesus meets and encounters when it comes to the Gospels on Wednesday nights, and continue with the theme of Wednesday nights, just with a more male slant to it.